this one is a bit long, so maybe I'll just show the beginning and then we can speak over as the parts of this.
Tu sais quand je me cache vraiment dans mon rêve, j'ai planté dans ma tête. Tout mon corps vient dans ma tête. Après quand je suis en train de dormir, le rêve il vient. Et après les pieds et tout il vient. Ça rentre dans ma tête. Alors, le matin, si tu ouvres les yeux, il vient vite. Allez dans le vélo. Après, quand tu l'ouvres, il revient à pied et après il dit oui, il faut bébé. Après, il dit allez, ça va. Parce que après, c'est comme si ma tête elle était coupée. Je connais le mot. Le mot c'est un mot. Mon mot. Un mot. Et toi?
So here there are two things that strike me when I see this and I see the new film.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing is the first words that the girl says in the film, when I dream and plant it in my head.
Yeah.
And the second thing is that it is a film in reverse.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with the first thing. This is what happens in PLANT.MOV.
Mm-hmm.
It is a dream, like a dreamscape,
Mm-hmm.
where you dream
Mm-hmm.
and are planted in your head. This is how
Mm-hmm.
I want to read the film.
Yeah, I think it's. I also realized it in the way you've connected those works, that actually the dream is also something that I use very much to, I don't know, construct the narrations. But this film was made also in south of Morocco, in Oasis, and it was summertime, so it was really hot. It was about 50 degrees. And we were there for a short time, for about a week, so it was also kind of short to seize something more than... We hardly met any inhabitants because everyone was in their homes during the day and only being out at night. So we were just wandering in those completely empty streets in that village, and I was just trying to film a few stuff. But I think also in what you mentioned earlier in this idea of ecology, there's something that I'm interested in the idea of ecology of time and how we can really use time as a resource or something to really look at more or also care about, as you say, like we should care for the living word and we can also care more for time. And time here was very stretched. Everything felt much longer than it really was because it was just hard to just move, actually. And I guess I was interested in this idea of how you could stretch time, and indeed everything is in reverse and in reverse in the film. And I guess this is just something that gave a sort of eerie aspect to this place. And I was also questioning very much the imaginary of this place, just like in Atlas of Elements, how you can get a specific imaginary that is emanated from the landscapes of mountains and rivers, and in this case, the landscapes of desert and sand and palm trees. And so the kid who was with us was also from this village. He was living there, and he was just telling me about his dream, and I didn't even understand the story because it's the way also kids tell things. It doesn't make a lot of sense. But I liked this sort of parallel of what kind of dreams he would have there, and if we could just imagine also of our stay just being a sort of dream there because everything was so blurry and very hard to seize actually. Yeah.
Yeah. And when we talk about PLANT.MOV, this is a film about becoming plant. Could you say it like that?
I think, yeah, I mean, it's something that I try to do, also started at Atlas of Elements, is to take this perspective of, being out of this human perspective. Like, what if we actually started to think as other forms of living creatures? Like, if you put yourself in the body or the mind of a plant, and how much can we also access to this coming from our rational way of thinking and rational way of approaching things. And I think it came from this theory of animism that has been developed in South America, and that everything is alive and everything has a spirit, which is also something that was very recurrent in the research in Atlas of Elements. And then it's something that I tried to somehow approach in a very light way of just imagining myself as something else and not just as a human being, and see how it could, open up new forms of telling stories and approaching reality. And in the film, I don't think I've introduced the film, but the film is the dream of a plant set in a sort of blurred future, and she talks about a dream that she has and that is being recalled and reconstituted through the film of a human being who's a bit adrift in the city, or somehow is just having a trouble with her time and trying to find another time of being. Yeah.
And when we had our first conversation, our first meeting, there's this one word that I have been thinking about since then, which is arabre.
Yeah.
This is this word where you were playing with, which comes from Arab and arbre, Arab and tree. So it is about being rooted, but at the same time not, because this plant, when you're PLANT.MOV is moving all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, completely. It's a very funny thing because it's just one day I was walking in the street and I was carrying a plant and I had my earphones on and then I had to do something with my phone without the earphones, and so they were just like, bothering me, so I plugged them in the plant, and just before that I was listening to Arab music, and when I planted them in the pot I had just this funny idea of listening to Arab. So arbre in French is tree, and Arab is Arab, and so it just came up as a mixed thing, and then I thought, oh, what could be, how can you think, for example, as a plant of being Arab? And then it suddenly became super absurd to me, this kind of constructed identity to say, oh, I'm European, I'm French, I'm Arab, I'm Spanish. And I was just looking at this plant thinking, it's an Arab plant, and then just sort of joking about this, like, oh, it's, singing in Arabic and it's doing those Arabic dances. And the word sticked with me for a very long time. And I think the film PLANT.MOV embodies a lot of those problematics that are related to migration, exile, displacement, also this feeling of being adrift when you go to another country and it's different cultures and how you feel. And I think from that moment I was always noticing potted plants, and it just from that moment it just seemed like a complete weird absurd thing to go and unroot a plant and then put it in a pot and then place it in enclosed spaces, just like it's very strange. I mean, it's a very cultured as movement, as like a structure, just like we are owning animals, but it's just, I mean, who are we to decide to own a piece of nature or to label it or or market it, which is very much related to the economy we live in. In the film there is very much this parallel of a plant that is being carried by the girl in the film, and this idea also of just someone who's somehow lost in the city or unrooted or disconnected from its reality, etc., etc.
Yeah. Maybe this is the time to show a little fragment of PLANT.MOV.
So the film is going to be shown tonight at Het Bos at 8:30. Oops. And there's a little extract that we're going to show. Spoon? Spush. Which is more like a teaser. So that you come tonight. Oh.
It took me a long time. It's a very layered film.
Yeah.
So I I watched it several times, and each time I saw it in another way. Like first as a science fiction film, then as a film about ecology, and then finally I thought, this is a film about film. It's a meta film. It has a lot to do with the windows you show in your film. I have to think of André Bazin, the French film critic, and one of the film critic who inspired Oliver Vague in the late 50s, from then on. And from him, film was a window on the world. And the strange thing with André Bazin, who was a cinephile, who loved cinema, is that he was really aiming at the end of cinema. So the end of cinema would be when film and reality become one. And that's why he wanted as less editing as possible, long shots, big frames, so direct sound, all these things were very important. With you it's completely different. It's for you, film is really, you're filming after the end, actually. So, and the technology of film is becoming very important to show things. And film is not a window on the world, but it is like a window in the world. This is what is shown in images like these. So you have this display with windows. At the same time, you also have your choice to film in Super 8, which adds another layer to the image, the texture. Upon the textures of the windows itself. And then the last thing is that all of a sudden you decided to change the ratio of the image. So you get some kind of a cinemascope film, which stands very far from Super 8. So you have this amateur technology, Super 8, and this very professional cinemascope. So all these things make it, in a way, a film about film.
Yeah, I think not at the beginning, but it's in the middle of the film. I started to think of it also as you're saying. I really like this idea of how film can be surviving humanity, or as in, I talk about things, or I'm interested in things that pre-existed human life. So I'm also thinking of what can also survive human life. And film is definitely a very human gesture because it's a human creation, and we master those tools. But I was also very much interested in how, for example, a film can generate its own dream. Like if at night, a beamer, does it really, like how the data still exists in those places, like in computers and technology and everything, because it's actually filled with human activity and data. But today, we have artificial intelligence, and we arrived at a point where we managed to create some things that could go beyond us and could really survive us, maybe destroy us, I don't know. But I'm very interested in this, and I think this is also why maybe the film is so layered, because I like this idea of having, of thinking of reality as something that is multiple and infinite and super open, and not actually as sort of one way of looking at things, or just like, rational thinking is what dominates any form of thinking today, everywhere, almost everywhere in the world, but as a dominant way of thinking. And it's a very one-way perspective and narrative. And so for me, opening like this is also a sort of resistance to this. Like, how can we resist to those micro narratives that are bigger than us and that we have, again, also to bear without necessarily having a choice. And so, yeah, the choice of the ratio, the choice of the celluloid, like using analog, but at the same time super techy ratios and ways of screenings, and yes, also I mean the filming the reflections in the city and those sort of layering with humans and cars and plants, and it's just somehow trying to combine everything together, but also see how a lot of things coexist together at the same time. So it's also again maybe this is less unfolding time, this is more compressing time, this is more bringing everything in together, and finding a way or a place in this actually.
I don't know if there are any questions from you now.
You refer to the plant as a she?
To the plant?
Yeah.
Do I? Maybe that comes actually from French and also Arabic. Is it feminine in Arabic? Yes, and it's feminine in French and Arabic. So maybe I actually feminized it in English, if it wasn't supposed to. Yeah.
I thought it was because it was about you.
No. No, I actually tried to stay kind of neutral in the, I mean obviously not, but but no, yeah.
So you talked about, you touched already a lot on things that are networked, like artificial intelligence, which is also very important in PLANT.MOV. And so this is my last question. You, as an artist in a network society, as a networked artist, you could say, traveling around from Casablanca to London to Amman, Antwerp, an artist in residence in Amman and in Antwerp. So this is my last question. How important is this idea of the residence for an artist? Thank you.
I think it's, as you mentioned, it's those both words, like how to travel and be at residence at the same time. So it's very much how you can forget everything that you've considered as a home, and you come into a new place and you really adapt, and you give this attention to what's around you, to see something that is not constructed, but it's always like it's always a very tricky thing again, and I think it's the same thing as when you travel as a tourist and you go to a place and you always really want to do the most authentic, you really want to have an authentic experience and really seize, the truthiness of the place and being like a local and sort of, adapting yourself. But I think that's really something that's very impossible to do, and it's just better if we accept that when you go to a place, you travel with who you are and all your, everything that made you as a person. And this idea of creating fictions from landscape, for me, is a way of accepting that, and it's in that way, whatever could be done as a gesture would be authentic, because it comes from a story that you want to tell, and it's a story that was triggered in a specific place, but it was triggered within yourself. Therefore, whatever you say would be somehow ethical or true or close to a reality. But I think trying to capture every time the reality of a specific place in 1 month or 1 week or 3 months is super short, and it would be super pretentious to think that we could go travel any place in the world and document a different reality than us. And I think fiction is really something that finds a way to keep things at a micro scale, or in like a very personal scale, and can create links from there. It's really something that can generate stories or narrations that people can actually relate, identify, or not necessarily, but we're looking at things in a very human perspective actually, but just because it comes from imagination or story crafting. It's not trying to grasp in a scientific way somehow some things that are just always going to escape us because they're way bigger than us, and we're just a couple of years of life going through that, so it's good to rescale. Yeah.
When you say that it's impossible to capture a place in an image or in a film, I think it is also in a way inevitable, because this is what happens in PLANT.MOV, that you have these very generic images that can go with any place, like the ones we saw in the fragment of the windows. Could be any city. But at the same time, you have these places that make Antwerp as the city that it is, like the pedestrian tunnel, the towers of the city. So it is inevitable to.
Of course, it's a landscape. But what I mean by seizing a reality or portraying this reality is, I think, more related to the experience that one can have in a city or in a community or in a period of time. I think it's mostly somehow opposing the gesture of documentaries and fiction, and that we're always looking at reality through our affects and through our beings. And I think that's something that shapes the look that we give or that we put on things. And I think in my practice, trying at certain times being very torn between the two, I think fiction was something that was way more liberating for me, and that was way more giving me a sense of actually grasping something that felt more real than trying to capture, than trying to document what I was looking at or what I was experiencing. Because I found myself that in the latter, it's always related to preconceptions that we have, whereas fiction goes from there's already a distance that you put with things, so you're very free to explore that, and I think this freedom is very important in the way we try to portray or create actually.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I was wondering if you have someone in mind that would watch the film if you make the film. Do you have like an audience or a group or?
I think it really depends for each film. For example, this one, during the entire editing process, because it's somehow narrated or brought visually by an artificial intelligence in the narration. And during the editing process, I was constantly imagining machines looking at the film. Most of the time it was, but I think also because it's the line of the story and of the film, so I was just, because in my mind it was this, so I was just trying to imagine this. And it's also very difficult because then, after the editing process, you watch the film and you also realize that there's a lot of wrong things and that a lot of things don't make sense, or they go too fast or they go too slow. Yeah, and I think each process really has its own process. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So-
Thank you very much for staying.
Film will be screened tonight.
Yes,
Pieter?
at 8:30 at Het Bos, with 2 other great films. Yes.
And you can also have dinner at the Bos, just to say.
Okay.
All right, thank you.